The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. My name is Sharon Worrell. I'm the Senior Manager of Education and Research at Fight Colorectal Cancer, and we're excited to welcome you today to our webinar, Cancer-Related Fatigue. So today's webinar, we have a couple of speakers today, so a little different than our normal webinars. We have Dr. Bram Kuiper, we have Michael Mancini, and Amy Rosenblum, who will be joining us. Excuse me. If you're on your computer, you can ask a question in the panel on the right side of your screen, and we will have time at the end for a Q&A. The webinar will be recorded in our webinar archive. You can go to fightcrc.org/webinar to find it there, along with all of our previous webinars. If you're on Twitter, please feel free to tweet along, and use the hashtag CRCwebinar. Fight Colorectal Cancer offers a number of free resources to patients and caregivers and all those touched by colorectal cancer. We have our Tabooty podcast, where we talk about taboo and trending topics. We have our resource line that you can call toll-free. And we also have our late-stage MSS CRC Trial Finder, which is a curated list powered by patients. You can learn more about that at trialfinder.fightcrc.org. The information and services provided by Fight Colorectal Cancer are for general informational purposes only. The information and services are not intended to be substitutes for professional medical advice, diagnoses, or treatment. If you are ill or suspect that you are ill, see a doctor immediately. In an emergency, call 911 or go to the nearest emergency room. Fight CRC never recommends or endorses any specific physicians, products, or treatment for any condition. So I'd like to introduce our speakers today. We have Dr. Bram Kuiper. He's a clinical psychologist, scientific entrepreneur, and CEO of Tired of Cancer. Up until July 2017, Bram was the CEO of the Helen Dowling Institute for Psycho-Oncology and Research. With over 30 years of experience in the field of psycho-oncology and co-writing treatment protocols, he's now devoted his career to seeing the Tired of Cancer app help as many people as possible who suffer from cancer-related fatigue. We also have Mike Mancini, who's a stage 4 colon cancer survivor. He was diagnosed in June of 2017 at age 42. He is currently pursuing an MBA, and he works full-time managing a team of small commercial insurance customer service reps. He's also a 2019 and 2020 Fight CRC ambassador. And then we have Amy Rosenblum, who's spent over 10 years in the US healthcare industry. She is working currently for Tired of Cancer as their Director of Partnerships. So hello, all of our wonderful speakers. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting us.
I'm gonna go ahead and hand over the controllers to you guys so we can kick off our presentation.
Okay. There we go. Everyone should see our screen, the Understanding Cancer-Related Fatigue page that's bright green.
Looks good.
Wonderful. Well, to kind of summarize what we're going to go over today, we're really going to focus on talking about the problem, cancer-related fatigue, what it is, the impact it has, the characteristics, and most importantly, what you can do to better manage it. But we want to make sure we leave plenty of time for questions and answers as well. So with that, let's get started. Talking about the problem, which is cancer-related fatigue. What many people know is that cancer and its treatments can lead to many side effects. Typically, everyone's familiar with the nausea, the hair loss, pain, but the most common problem is actually cancer-related fatigue, or CRF, as I'll refer to it throughout today's conversation. It's the #1 side effect of cancer and its treatments. And that's really what we're here today to talk about, to give more insight into what it is and how you can better manage it. But Bram, if CRF is the most common side effect, why don't we hear more about it?
I think that's a very good question. It's really amazing that fatigue is at the one side the most common side effect of cancer and its treatments, and on the other side it's the most unspoken problem. And I think the main reason is that chronic fatigue often has no medical cause. And therefore doctors don't prescribe this. They can't prescribe some sort of medication, and they feel empty-handed.
Right.
And that's an awful feeling. And to prevent this feeling, they often don't mention or address fatigue. That's the reason that it's rather unspoken.
Okay. Now, I think to kind of start from the beginning, it's really talking about the definition of what cancer-related fatigue is. The National Comprehensive Cancer Network in the US has this definition that I think really summarizes it well, and I'll read it here, that CRF is a distressing, persistent, subjective sense of tiredness or exhaustion related to cancer or cancer treatment that is not proportional to recent activity and interferes with usual functioning. Now, Mike, when you look at this definition and think about your journey, how did you realize that you had cancer-related fatigue?
Yes, I would, even though I would talk with my oncologist and my chemo nurses about, how tired I was, it's those moments where, you're sitting there doing absolutely nothing and you just feel completely wiped out. Or, there would be times where I would sleep until lunchtime or dinner time, and then I'd get up for a few minutes and I'd go right back to bed, and I would just always feel constantly exhausted, and I wasn't physically exerting myself, and it just was not natural for me because I was always a very active and fit and healthy person. So to feel that tired almost instantaneously, quite often, that's how I knew something was it was definitely related to the cancer and the fatigue experience with the treatments.
Got it. So you knew very quickly it was different than what, I guess, normal fatigue would feel like.
Yes, definitely.
I think it's a great transition to the slide we have around the characteristics of cancer-related fatigue, because you're so true in that it's so different. Some of the characteristics is it can come on suddenly without warning, almost like kind of hitting a brick wall is what we've heard people describe it as. It's extreme, like you said, just extreme exhaustion. And then the last point, which Mike, you just highlighted, that it lasts longer than normal fatigue. When you look at this list of characteristics, Mike, does anything pop out at you as far as what you personally have experienced?
Oh, most definitely. So when you talk about it comes on suddenly, I remember times where I would be trying to sit up at the table and eating a meal, and all of a sudden the fork would feel like it weighed 500 pounds. And I just, and just trying to chew, it just felt like it took all of this energy out of me to just do normal daily activities. And it would just come out of nowhere. And I wasn't used to that. I used to be a group fitness instructor, so I would work out pretty hard, and even after a workout you feel tired, but this was just a completely different type of tired. Like when I would lay on the couch, it would just feel like I was melting into the couch and I couldn't get up after that. I was so exhausted and from doing absolutely nothing.
Yeah. I think what you just described, Mike, is, it's so great to have you on this call because you're giving such a unique perspective. And one of the things that people don't realize is that CRF is different for every single person. Everyone can describe it a little bit differently, and they have their own, kind of personal moments where they realize they had it. And that's why I wanted to share this word cloud as far as just the impact it can have. We always say, step back and think, how would you describe it? What are the ways? Because I feel like we get new words every day when we ask that question. So these were just some of the big ones that came out of just asking, when you describe cancer-related fatigue and its impact, what are the words that come to mind? And so, Mike, I'm curious how you would describe it yourself.
Yeah, debilitating definitely for sure was a big one, and life-altering. I know for me, I slept a lot during the day, and I would have trouble sleeping at night. Sometimes it would just be, from a fear of having recurrence, a nightmare or something like that, to I had a temporary ostomy. So, you had to my bowels were active a lot at night, so I would have to empty the bag or let a lot of the air or gas out of the bag before it got too big and popped. So there were things like that contributed to me having a lot of lack of sleep at night. So I would have to sleep a lot during the day. So then you miss out on doing things with friends or family, and that gets frustrating because you want to try to not to miss out on things, but at the same time, like I remember going to family functions and everybody would be having dinner or opening presents or what have you, and I'd be on the couch sleeping because I couldn't sleep at night.
Right, and you kind of transitioned right into our next slide so well, which is just the impact it can have on you as an individual, but then also your family, because you're not operating in a bubble, but just the there's kind of three buckets we have here as far as the physical limitations that it can cause. And so like you said, just not really being able to be as active, and being a group fitness instructor, I assume that you're not able to do what you once did because of that CRF. There's also the social invalidation, so not being able to work or working less, not being able to participate in all the various activities. And Bram, feel free to chime in if there's anything I'm missing here. But then there's also the psychological element, and I think a lot of people don't think about this piece as much, but what can come from it is anxiety, depression, and like you mentioned, poor sleep for a variety of different reasons. So Mike, you touched on a little bit of the impact. Is there anything else you'd want to share as far as, when you think of the CRF and the impact it's had for you? Is there anything specific that comes to mind and saying, yep, this is really where, if it wasn't for CRF, I'd be able to do X, Y, or Z?
Yeah, well, I mean, in addition to the physical exhaustion, there's also a mental exhaustion. So, I work I was, a 20+ year employee in the corporate world, managing, 13, 14 people. So I always had people interaction. I'm, a lot of emails going back and forth, making decisions. And then when I got sick and had to go through treatment, it was just trying to understand and comprehend what I was reading, trying to have that memory recall. So a lot of the stuff that I used to be able to do pretty easily and quickly, my day, it took me a lot longer to get through things. I remember would have to reread things multiple times to make sure I understood. So there was also a mental exhaustion that kind of went along with the physical limitations as well. So it just again, that just compounds on your day. So you're feeling it in both ends, from the physical, the mental, and then again, then you add in the social aspect of it. So all three of those, it's a challenge for sure.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, as I have mentioned earlier, fatigue is different for everyone, and it's really hard to measure it objectively since it is a very subjective feeling. Bram, can you share a little bit about the fatigue score and how this can help kind of quantify fatigue for a lot of individuals?
Yeah. It's very hard to quantify because, as you mentioned already, you can't be measured objectively. It's a subjective feeling. So there is no blood test or a scan or something else for it. And it's the only person involved can indicate how tired he or she is. That's the person, her or himself.
Right.
So just believe if some of your patients say, I feel tired, then he or she is tired. And you can measure it by extensive questionnaires. A lot of well-validated questionnaires are available, but also with one simple question, namely by asking someone to apply a figure between 0 and 10 to the fatigue, whereby 10 is not tired and 0 is not tired at all, and 10 is extremely tired. And there is some agreement internationally that a score between 0 and 4 indicates that it's only mildly fatigued, between 4 and 7 moderately fatigued, and between 7 and 10 severely fatigued. And almost every cancer patient, all the cancer patients, is moderately to severely fatigued during the first year after the diagnosis, during the treatment. And so it's 80 to 90% of all the cancer patients in the first year after treatment feel tired, feel exhausted, as Mike also explained it very well.
So score of 4 to 10 that first year especially.
Yeah, but also the prolonged fatigue that occurs in the 30 to 40%. So it's an enormous it's a number of people suffering from fatigue after the treatments.
Right. Mike, when you look at the fatigue score, what rating would you give your fatigue today?
I would today, since I'm not in the, I'm done with really the full Fox, and I'm more on a maintenance chemo. I'd say more in the 2 to 3 range. It's, certainly not as bad as it was when I was going through full Fox.
Right. So you would say kind of that during the treatment, you were more that initial phase, you were more in the moderate to severe fatigue.
Absolutely. There were, I would say in the first 3 rounds, probably in the 3, 4, 5 range. And then as I got into the later rounds of chemo, definitely more toward the 7, 8 range.
Yeah. So really just highlighting exactly what Bram just shared as far as that initial, the initial incidence, and then even long-term after treatment ends, it can still exist for 30 to 40% of people. The next slide I wanted to highlight is really the prevalence of fatigue. So in the beginning, I had shared that we know it's the #1 side effect, but to really put some numbers and kind of visualize what that means, that's, if you just look at the Europe and the US alone, that's 16 million people that are suffering from CRF. And that's just going off of the kind of long-term fatigue, 40%, kind of as an example. So if everyone held hands, they could go from New York to Athens and back. And the reason we like to share this is that a lot of people feel like it's just them that's going through fatigue, but you're truly not alone. It can be a very isolating experience, but it's important to know that there's so many other people that are also going through this, and that you truly are not alone.
Yeah, and I'd like to add that this is only about the chronic cancer-related fatigue, because we know that at the first year, as we mentioned before, 80 to 90% of the cancer patients are fatigued. So there are even more than 60 million. Right,
exactly. So it's an astonishing number, really, when you kind of sit back and think about it. Wanting to kind of switch gears and really talk about the factors that influence fatigue, that cause the cancer-related fatigue. I know that's one of the common questions that we tend to hear, is exactly how does cancer-related fatigue occur, and why does it exist? So, Bram, I think this is really where you can help us understand all those various factors.
Yeah, I hope so. So if you see this picture on this slide, you can see there are many factors that can cause fatigue. And first of all, it is related to the illness itself, to the cancer, to the tumor. Next to that, it's related because they are very intrusive iatrogenic factors, and people become tired. They get tired because of the chemotherapy, the radiotherapy, and the surgery. We can have besides the cancer, there can be also other physical disorders, like COPD or cardiovascular diseases. And because of those treatments, you also can become tired, and side effects of other medications. So there are 5 of those 6 domains that are shown here in this picture, has to do with the medical background, and they come together often. But there's always also in the more chronic stage an influence of psychological, social, and behavioral factors. And if you look to this picture, you can see 5 of the 6 domains, there is a one-way direction. For example, you can become tired because of anemia, but you don't get anemia because you're tired. So that's one direction. But if you look at the psychological and social behavioral factors, there is an interaction, there's a two-way direction.
Right.
So for example, like Mike told us, you can get sleep disorders, sleep problems. If you have sleep problems, you become tired. Your daily life is changing because sleeping problem is not only a problem of the night, it's also a problem of the day. Mm-hmm. You become tired. If you are tired, you can't sleep very well. So there is an interaction and people end up in a kind of vicious circle. Right. And that's what happens with cancer-related fatigue.
I think one incredibly important point to note is that if you have cancer-related fatigue, it's especially important to talk to your doctor about it, because they can really evaluate any of the medical causes of the fatigue. While we'll talk more about the psychological and social and behavioral, they're really equipped to help address any of those elements as well. So just wanted to put that out there. And I know, Mike, you had shared that you were discussing this with your oncologist as soon as you realized you had it, correct?
Yeah, it was that, and it was a bit of the depression, you know, because going from being really physically fit to losing all that muscle, and also, you know, after being out of work for a while, I lost my job protection. So, you know, and a relationship I was in had ended. So there was a lot going on between not sleeping, being depressed. So they were talking to me about, you know, did I need to speak with somebody? They prescribed some medication to try to help me sleep as well. I'll be honest with you, you know, the meds weren't the best for me, you know, and I hope this is okay to say, but I also had a medical marijuana card, and that actually seemed to help me a little bit more with the anxiety and being able to sleep a little bit, you know, and it also helped with the nausea as well, and, you know, and increasing my appetite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
So to move on to what Bram had discussed, the kind of two-way street when it comes to the psychological aspect of cancer-related fatigue. You mentioned the vicious circle and sleep as an example. There's a variety of different other elements, emotions, events, and feelings that can also play a role. And we really label that as the vicious circle, that a lot of individuals, everyone has a bit of their own vicious circle. Can you kind of take us through some of the elements that are on here?
Yeah, I'd like to do that. But before that, I'd like to repeat and to emphasize that you first have to figure out if there's any medical explanation for your fatigue, because you have to be treated for that. But in this case, we know for the long-standing, the chronic fatigue, for 90% there's no medical explanation, and people can end up in a vicious circle. And a vicious circle is a situation in which something has a certain consequence, and while that consequence in turn maintains or strengthens the situation, so you get that vicious circle. And this phenomenon plays a role in long-term chronic cancer-related fatigue. So, for example, someone can avoid physical exertion for fear of becoming tired, but then you lose strength and fitness as a result of this, and hence become more tired. So that's one example of the vicious circle. And when countering cancer-related fatigue, it is always necessary to first make an analysis of each person's own vicious circle.
Right.
So common complaints, and these are also shown in this picture, that often occur in relation to fatigue and related fatigue are anxiety, depression, stress, lack of exercise, and sleeping problems.
Right, and I was going to say, and Mike, given the example you had shared, it was great to hear that you knew you were having some sleeping issues. You discussed it with your doctor, and you sought out solutions to help address that. And I think that really helps kind of show here kind of what type of, when you're in a vicious circle, really understanding what's going on and taking that step back and kind kind of evaluating yourself.
Mike, do you recognize something like the vicious circle?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, almost everything on this circle right here, I can relate to and having. I mean, going from, you know, not having my job and losing my fitness, that led to some depression. Every time I felt any type of pain, that was a worry, is that, oh my gosh, is that my cancer coming back? You know, of course, there's high financial stress that comes along with it, especially when you're, you know, you're out of a job, not being able to exercise, because, you know, when you have colon surgery like I had, that you have to be very careful about what you're lifting and not getting a hernia. So you know, that leads to, you know, then you're not exercising at all. And so the whole thing, everything on here, I can definitely relate to all of that.
Okay, thanks. It drains energy, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So I assume everyone's kind of sitting back going, okay, well, if I am in this vicious circle, what can I do about it? And that's where we have the interventions here that the National Comprehensive Cancer Network has published, these kind of standards of care back in 2017, evaluating both the pharmacologic and the non-pharmacologic. And Bram, I know you've read a lot of this research and kind of looked at all of it. Can you help us understand kind of both sides?
Yeah, I think we always have to follow the authorities, and I think the NCCN has done very good work with publishing the standards of care. And before they published this well-considered standards of care, they've done an extensive literature study, and there were no into interventions against CRF in case there were no demonstrable medical causes.
Right.
And they figured out that pharmacological interventions were found to be of limited effectiveness. And that's what is in line with what I mentioned before, that doctors feel empty-handed. And better outcomes appeared to come from non-pharmacological interventions. That's at the right side. In particular, there was positive evidence for behavioral therapy, in particular the cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, exercises, interventions, and psychoeducation. And in this, they also say, the National Conference, you have to combine them. So they have to have a multi intervention. And so you have to combine the combination of these methods. That's the most promising way to help people to deal with cancer-related fatigue.
Right. And like you said, it's so complex and every person is different. So the combination of these kind of non-pharmacologic interventions really can help address some of it. So Mike, I know you had said with the fatigue score today, you're really in a mild fatigue state. I guess, what have you been able to do to better manage your fatigue?
Yeah, so for me, I started with, once I had my colostomy reversed, and I was able to move a little bit more freely, and I definitely, I know there's plenty of people out there who have permanent ostomies who exercise, so that shouldn't be a detriment for people. I think for me, it was something I needed to overcome. But when that happened, I started with 10 weeks of yoga. I knew I needed to stretch myself out before I could start lifting weights. But during that time, with yoga, you have to really be mindful, right? You have to focus on being in the present. You have to work on shutting your mind off from other things that are going on and trying to focus on being there in the moment. And that's important. That helps you as well when you're fighting cancer, right? Because there's so many of these other things going on. You have to be able to, at times, just push everything else out, focus on present. I'm here with my family, my friends, whatever it is that I'm doing. Let me focus on that and not worry about everything else at the moment. So that started, I think that mindfulness started with the yoga, and then transitioning into being able to get back to lifting. Now, I started with 5-pound weights, right? I couldn't lift a lot at first, but I've been back at it now for almost a year now, and I've been slowly just, making my gains in the gym. But that exercise helped for me personally. That motivates me. That keeps me going. That gives me energy during the day. I start my morning off with my workout, and then I come to work. So it just gives me a feeling of accomplishment too. It's like a little goal that I set for myself every day, and I get it done. I feel good about myself, and then again, all of the mindful, and I even do it with my team here at work once a month. We have a little mindfulness Monday, and we go into a conference room and we do 10 minutes of guided meditation. So I can't say enough for everything that's in column number 2.
Well, it's wonderful and to hear, what a positive impact it's made for you. And I love the fact you've incorporated it at work. I feel like I wish more people would do that. No, that's great to hear. I know we just have a few minutes left, and Sharon, you can yell at me if we're getting over on time, but I wanted just to get to kind of the last few minutes, highlight again. We wish there was a pill for this, but there really is no magic pill, and CRF is a complex problem that requires a kind of multifaceted approach. We just wanted to highlight the entire program, the entire app that Bram and the Tired of Cancer team created a few years ago, that really takes into account all the things we just shared about the NCCN standards of care. So what you see on the screen is the 4 pieces of the program that pulls in the psychoeducation. So learning to understand more about fatigue, anxiety, various elements that drive fatigue. You also have exercises, mindfulness techniques, so breathing, stretches, that sort of thing, but then also motivational elements like the tip of the day. But the overarching goal of the app is to measure yourself on a weekly basis and understand what gives you energy and what takes energy away and what your underlying leak may be. And Mike, throughout our conversation, you had said, it was sleeping problems or anxiety. Those are all kind of different elements of what someone's leak could be. And the goal of the program is that when you would understand kind of what's taking away your energy, you can address that with these various steps. So just wanted to kind of share the entire program, since it really takes into consideration everything the NCCN has come out with their standards of care. And lastly, I just wanted to summarize, and hopefully we still have a few minutes for questions. Number 1, you're not alone. And like you mentioned, CRF is the number 1 side effect. There's millions of people out there who may be going through the exact same situation you're in. There are ways to cope, and Mike, thank you for sharing your journey and your perspective, because you really highlighted that there are ways you can deal and manage with CRF, and you can get through it. So really happy to hear that you found various ways to incorporate being able to manage CRF in your life. And as you shared too, taking small steps. You won't be able to, kind of get up and maybe lift 100 pounds, but like you said, it's taking it day by day and seeing that progress. So with that, I think we can open it up for questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Kuiper and Amy and Mike, for a great presentation. Wonderful overview of cancer-related fatigue. For people that are tuning in live right now, if you do have questions, please type them into the chat box, and I'll be able to ask our presenters on your behalf. So we do have a few questions. This one is for Mike. How did you manage returning to work when you were experiencing cancer-related fatigue? And do you have any suggestions for those who are working during treatment?
Yes. So I think for me, being very upfront and honest with my employer about what some of my challenges and limitations were, and most employers have like a job accommodation process. So I would strongly encourage you to, go through that, fill it out, work with your cancer team, your social worker at the cancer center, whatever you have, whatever resources you have, fill out that paperwork. My employer's been very flexible in terms of, hey, Mike, if you're tired and you need to bow out for an hour, go for it. Do what you need to do. We're here to support you. So, as long as it doesn't impact my work and I get my job done, they're okay with whatever I need to do to manage this. So for me, it was about just being upfront and honest with my employer about what I could and couldn't do. But also it was a transition, right? We worked it out. For the first 3 or 4 weeks, I came back on a part-time basis and slowly increased to more of a full-time position back into my role that I'm doing now.
Okay.
Dr. Kuiper, do you have any additional comments about that, dealing with work and CRS?
I think it's. I agree with the statement of Mike, and it depends on the employer and the kind of work you're doing. And to my experience, it often is very hard to return to your work because most of the time. The side effects of cancer and the emotional side effects, the mental and then the physical, are you can't see them, so they're hidden. And if you return to your work in the first period, your colleagues, your former colleagues, are rather sympathetic and positive and supporting. But after a while, they think, okay, you look well and you look fine, and you can behave in a good way. So you must be the one that you was before the diagnosis, and you can't be that person. And then it goes wrong. And then you need to have a well-thinking employer to support you and to adapt and adjust your work. Probably you have to diminish the amount of hours to work weekly, for example. But always talk with them and go on with and inform your colleagues and your employer. That will help you.
Great. So it sounds like open communication is really key when returning to work.
Sure. Of course, as Mike also said, there are limitations and challenging. It's very confronting if you can't do the things you did before. So you're also your own challenge, and sometimes you are passing your own boundaries, and you don't stick to your physical and mental limitations, and that's always a challenge to keep to that.
Great, thank you. Our next question. This person is mentioning that when they tell their family that they're tired, they often don't seem to understand that they truly are very tired. So what kind of advice do you have, or what do you wish friends and family knew about cancer-related fatigue?
I know this is a phenomenon that we hear often. You can do a kind of exercise, this kind of imagination exercise. So you have to ask the people to imagine that they have to put on a jacket, a very heavy jacket, full with stones and sand. So it's heavy on your shoulders and your body. And put on spectacles you can't see anything through. And then you have to walk with that for 10 kilometers in a hurry, uphill. That's something people experience when they feel exhausted. That's one of the things you have to do. I think to explain people, it's not a cognitive thing. People have to experience that fatigue patients experience.
Yeah, so I think to Bram's point, it's really being able to describe it. Just saying you're tired, people kind of just think, well, yeah, but you can have an extra cup of coffee, right? They don't truly understand how different cancer-related fatigue is. So to Bram's point, it's really helping by describing it and kind of giving those situations. I know, Mike, you had shared, you felt like when you ate dinner, your fork was 500 pounds. When you start describing it in that way, people can start to get a better sense of, wow, this is something I don't really, I've never experienced before. So they can kind of better comprehend what you may be going through. Mike, I'm curious if you have any other thoughts on that too.
The other thing I tend to tell people sometimes, because they can relate a little bit to it, is I say it's like having the flu and a concussion at the same time, but multiply it by 10. And it just doesn't really seem to go away, because people can kind of relate to that exhaustion with the flu. And if you've ever got knocked in the head, that kind of, that tough ability to focus or have that mental clarity or concentration, you struggle with that. So it's kind of how I put it sometimes.
Yeah, all of these examples that you have given, I think are really useful. That fork example, putting on the heavy jacket, the flu, just giving your friends and family an opportunity to kind of imagine what that feels like. I think these are all really, really wonderful ways to translate kind of a little bit of the feeling that cancer-related fatigue could have. Let's see, we have a couple more questions here. What role, if any, and this is for the tired of cancer side, what role, if any, did patients play in the development of the application that you've developed?
A primary one, but Brum, you can share a little bit more.
You can add something. From the beginning, as you introduced me, I do have more than 30 years of experience in psycho-oncology. So I met a lot of cancer patients, fatigue cancer patients, and talked with them. And we attached them to the project. So we discussed a lot of things with them. And when we had the content of the entire app, we discussed this also with the patient. And one of the patient was a breast cancer patient, and she was an author. And she could write the good sentences. It's really, I don't explain it in a proper way, but it's not only a kind of scientific academic app. It's made with and for the cancer patients.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll add that the app has been out for a year, so we've had a lot of feedback that's come in over the past year. So we're continuing to develop and add more to the app because we keep getting feedback. So for instance, we just talked a lot about going back to the workplace. And so that's actually an entire theme we're planning and kind of developing right now, because it's such an important point that a lot of people are saying, hey, I need more support in trying to go through this situation. And so we're looking at those that use the app and patients to really help us better understand what they need so that we can continue to improve.
Thank you. How long after a cancer diagnosis do patients experience cancer-related fatigue? If treatment ends and I have no evidence of disease, does cancer-related fatigue stick around, or will it improve?
As I said before, there are some estimations, and as we know that after the diagnosis, then of course people can feel already tired because it's an emotional impact. But when the medical treatment starts, almost everyone gets tired because of the combination of the illness, the treatments, the emotions, the relatives, all the beloved ones who are in crisis. So there's a lot going around. For the long term, 30 to 40%, and that can go on for years, for more than 10 to 15 years. And that's rather stable. If you don't do anything, you stick, you're trapped in that vicious circle. And to our experience, if people know something about this vicious circle, they can they can have the feeling, oh, I can do something myself with it. And there's an acknowledge, and they get some grip on it. And that's also, we did a lot of research on the entire, and it's proven effective. So people feel more energetic and less fatigued and have more quality of life after 12 weeks of using the app. You don't need to use it every day. You can do it 3 times a week, 20 to 30 minutes, for example. But if we compare it with the people who didn't use the app, they also had a control group showed diminished fatigue. And that has to do with the fact that they suddenly figured out that they could do something themselves on it. So it's a long answer, but there are 2, I think, every fatigue cancer patient is one too much. It's the one too many. Mm-hmm. So we can do something on it. Of course, we have to manage our expectations, everybody. You often can't return to the period, to the person you were before the diagnosis, before the treatments. But there is room to improve.
Mm-hmm. And I think Mike's perspective throughout this whole conversation is a great example of that. Seeing that you were fatigued during treatment and after treatment, but then making that progress. So just wanted to share that point too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not even a year out from, my last recurrence. But little by little every day, so I'm still dealing with it, even though I don't have cancer at the moment. So yeah, it does diminish over time, but it doesn't go away completely. And you're definitely not the person you are, when you're first coming off the treatment and starting to regain your life back. It does take some time.
Mm-hmm. Sure, you're right.
We have a couple more questions that have come in. Mike, this one's addressed to you. You spoke of your work having accommodations for your fatigue, and you mentioned that you're also in a master's program. Are there accommodations in that area for education, for CRF, and what have you done to help manage that aspect of your life?
Yeah, just like with my employer, the university that I'm going through has an accommodation program. And it's the same thing, I had the cancer center fill out some paperwork, and then I talked with the individual from the university. Basically what they've done is just granted me a little extra time, on my assignments if I need it. So things that were due on Thursdays, I've got an extra day on. Things that were due on Sundays, I've got an extra due till the following Wednesday. That's in place ongoing. I never have to say, oh, I'm using my accommodation this week. It's always there. And it's for me to use it or not use it as I choose. And then they said, if there's ever anything else I need in the future, just reach out, and they'd be happy to have conversations with me. So that's what we've gotten, where I've gone so far with them.
So again, another being open about and communicating what's going on and figuring out a plan. We have one final question that has come in. We still have a little more time for questions, so if you all have additional, please type them into the chat box. So this person is experiencing cancer-related fatigue and still suffering from it, even post-treatment. He brings it up with his doctors, but all they say is that it is normal. It isn't until I ask a few times to see if I have anemia or something else that they take action. Are doctors aware that this is a common symptom? I feel like they have to be on the lookout for any signs of recurrence. And is this, and I think this is one of them. Is that correct? So I guess what kind of what do you see in the, in terms of providers addressing cancer-related fatigue? And is there a reason why it's sounding like this person's doctor isn't really taking much action to help resolve the side effect?
This kind of goes to what Bram had discussed earlier when saying, it's the #1 side effect, but no one seems to really know about it. And We've done a lot in trying to raise awareness, not only with, cancer organizations and patient groups, but also with the care provider community in helping them, feel like they can do something about it. And so Bram had stated, and I'll reiterate that often it's because they really don't have a tangible solution that they can offer a patient. It's unfortunate that a lot of people have said very similar things. The situation that you just described in the question, a lot of people, we actually have our patient advocate Yella here, who has shared similar things, that he's discussed it and didn't really know he could do anything about it because the oncologist or GP never shared anything. I think it really just goes down to the fact that there is no kind of pill or easy solution that they can offer. I wish I could have kind of a full understanding of exactly why that is. There could be additional reasons, but that seems to be one of the primary ones that we've heard. Yeah. And obviously every country and every population is different in terms of how their physicians look at this, but we've heard similar things in the Netherlands, in the UK, and throughout Europe. So it's unfortunately a problem that everyone is facing.
And I'm convinced that all the doctors all over the world have the best for everyone, the best for their patients, but they are unaware of the fact that there are also non-pharmacological solutions. And it's a pity, because if you communicate and say to your patients, I can't do anything, it's normal, then you get the kind of nocebo effect. And people get frustrated by it. They think they can't do anything themselves.
Right.
Thank you. I think that's it for our questions. So we'll go ahead and wrap up. Dr. Kuiper, Amy, Mike, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation today. And a huge thank you to everyone who joined us live. Again, you can find the recording on the Fight CRC website later today. And any final words from our presenters today?
No, thank you. Thank you for having us. I do have on the slide feedback or suggestions. Like I mentioned before, we certainly appreciate kind of patient perspective when it comes to the app. I also didn't mention that the app is free. So we're a social enterprise. We're not trying to make money. We're really just trying to make an impact. So we always appreciate insight, and I think, Mike, you did a terrific job being able to provide that to us today too. Sure.
Thank you. Yeah, and I would just say, as patients, we're our best advocates. So, speak up, especially if you feel something's not right or you want your doctor to explore something further. And then always, I know it's difficult. I struggled with it too, is finding those opportunities to, even if it's just go for a walk or walk up and down the hallway in your house. I live in New England, so the winters were tough to be outside, right? So I would walk up and down the hall in the house 10 or 15 times just to move. And I was lucky I had a good team that was really the first thing they would ask me before going to, medication is, are you getting up to move? Are you walking around? Because that's the best thing for you. So really challenge yourself to do that. If you're having an app, if you need something to push you to do that, is perfect. To keep accountability is huge. Set goals for yourself. You'd be surprised at how accomplishing little things like that, even if it's just walking for 5 minutes and setting that goal and doing it, how that helps you feel a lot better, and and it keeps you going so that you can do more the next day. Yeah. So don't give up.
I fully agree. Fully agree.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sure.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone again for the presentation and for joining us live. And we hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.